dementia really care about how much money you have? No, it doesn't. You could spend $500,000, you could spend $1 million on your care, or you could spend $250,000. How long you can take care of your loved one is basically based on your net worth. If you had to ask them, would you want all your money to go to pay for your care as you age, right? Or would you want that money to go to your favorite charity, your loved ones, your grandkids? What choice would you want to make?
When caregiving feels overwhelming and the system feels impossible to navigate, this is your guide. Here, you'll learn ways to navigate long-term care planning, find real support for caregiving, and prepare you for the road ahead. I'm your host, Lindsay Friedman, and now you're not in this alone. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Caregiver's Compass. I'm your host, Lindsay Friedman. Today, we welcome Scott Moen. Scott is the founder of Elder Life Group and a senior-focused strategist with nearly 3 decades of experience helping families protect lifetime assets and legacies. He's an absolute magician when it comes to Medicaid planning and asset protection. Scott has advised seniors nationwide, led multi-state advisor teams, and now partners with professionals across the country, like LT CareNav, to deliver practical solutions for aging with confidence. Thanks, Scott, for being here.
Thank you.
So you, as I said, you're just like this Medicaid magician. You have taught me things that I never knew existed in this industry. So let's start with the fact that most people think Medicaid planning sounds super overwhelming, kind of like a failure. But when we say Medicaid planning and asset protection, what do we actually mean, and how does it relate to real life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think for most people, I think there is a myth, definitely, that's probably been going on for at least 25 years, and that Medicaid is for poor people, right? But the reality is, if you look at the numbers, which I think the government every couple of years produce, it's the government congressional research project on long-term care services in the United States. And that report is done every 2 years. And what you'll find in that report is that we're spending as a country right now about $400 billion a year on long-term care services. That's everything from home health care, assisted living, skilled nursing, and who are the payers at the end of the day, what this report is kind of sharing with the general public. And Medicaid, between Medicare and Medicaid, so Medicare pays a small piece, but Medicaid in general is paying around 70%, 75% of that $400 billion each year. So what does that tell us? That our money, our family's money, does not last very long, right, in a care setting, whether that's home health care or assisted living or skilled, when the average cost of a nursing home is around $10,000 a month.
Yeah. And that's like such a huge number that I think most families cannot afford to pay that and then still keep food on the table for a spouse or other family members. But I think people are really scared of Medicaid. Like, I'm going to lose everything. I'm not going to have any money to even buy my grandchild a gift, right? And in some cases, those actually can happen.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Are there ways for that not to be the situation someone ends up in?
Yeah. What I would tell people is this: not having a plan actually is a plan. And so what do I mean by that? That unless you really create your own rule book and you actually create a plan, you are going to be subject to the government's rule book. And what does that mean? Well, that depends on whether you're married or single, how much your care is, what your income is, and what your assets are. So most people do not look for help until it's too late. And what do I mean by too late? Meaning they've already spent $200,000-$300,000 and now we're asking questions, right? And so I think none of this really becomes real to anybody until they've written their first $10,000 check to a facility or a $25,000 check for monthly home health care. And now they start realizing, well, this is real. But there is also this false sense of hope, like, well, we've got $1 million, we're fine. And then they don't realize that, okay, at $10,000 a month, you start going through your money really quick. And if it's a married couple, what if they both need care? And if it's a married couple, what's going to be left to take care of the community spouse? Women often outlive men, right? Yeah. So our job, if we're working with married couples, is to make sure that our community spouse, the one at home, and it could be a man, but that individual does not become broke paying for their loved one's care.
And a lot of these situations when we talk about the community spouse being left at home, I think there's a lot of fear about like losing a house.
Yeah.
What does that look like in a situation where you do lose a house versus how do you save your home?
Yeah, and that is a great question. I think for those that I'll say a couple things. When it comes to Medicaid planning, there are the rules that the government lays out in front of us. We really operate in the exceptions to the rules. We know the rules, but we're living in the exceptions to the rules. But if you follow the government's rule, I'll give you a quick example. So let's say that you are, maybe the facility or a family member says, well, we can exempt the home. Exempting that home at the time of care for Medicaid is different from protecting a home from asset recovery. Okay. And so there's a huge difference on protecting a home for eligibility and then ultimately losing that house in estate recovery. The states have become very smart on how they can recover from one's estate. What I do know is that they cannot collect until the second death. And so often it's this false sense of hope that people don't realize it. What happens is children realize it 15 years later when they're settling mom and dad's estate because now the second person died. And all of a sudden they realize, well, there's a lien on the property for $250,000. And so what we tend to help people is what we might be able to exempt the home at the time of eligibility, but now we need to make a plan how to protect that home from estate recovery. And that could be gifting the home to a trust. That could be selling the home and then doing a spend down strategy on the assets, on the value of the home. But I think you just have to be really careful on how to protect that home. And what you don't really want to do, because there's a lot of things also that go and play that of capital gains and whatnot, is you don't want to give your home to your son or daughter for $1. And that's the myths of what a lot of people have told you. Oh, just give the house away. And okay, well, what if they get divorced or what if they end up in a lawsuit? Where does your house go? So yeah, you got to be really careful on how to protect. And for most people, their home is their biggest asset or one of their biggest assets.
So I've got like so many questions that roll right off of that, but I'm going to start with this one. So say the community spouse stays in the home and the other spouse goes to assisted living. Now you have payments with your home, right? Like, so it's not just like, okay, your house to be paid off, but you still have taxes
Yeah.
and all of the stuff that goes around with it. What happens if you deplete your assets to the point where you can no longer actually afford the home?
Yeah, it
Does that
happens.
happen?
You don't see a lot of homeless seniors on the streets today, but the reality is, without doing proper planning, what you just stated happens all the time. I mean, we see the horror stories, right? Because we do work nationally and we see all the horror stories. We see situations where liens got put on properties and now families trying to figure out, is that legal? And we've seen situations where, the government does lay these rules out on what we call spousal asset protection strategies, right? Well, you get to exempt the home and you get to keep, a certain dollar amount, you get to keep some income. That doesn't apply unless you qualify unless you actually apply for Medicaid. So a lot of people think that that's just automatic, right? And so what I've seen so many times is that a family will spend $400,000 or $500,000 and they're already spending down into exempt assets. And it's too late. The money's gone. There is no refunds. You spent the wrong money. So for us, one of our key strategies that we do for everybody is whether we're going to accelerate financial relief through government benefits is one thing, but two, how do we pay for a facility and what bucket of money are we going to use to pay for the facility, keeping in mind taxes, right? Capital gains. And is that asset exempt? Are we spending the wrong money? Because what does it look like 5 years from now? And so, and most people, unless you've got a strategist helping you, 99% of the time, people are going to go to Google. They're going to get very confused. They're going to spend the wrong money.
And that's, I think, what people really miss all the misconceptions around Medicaid, even that I had a lot of
Yeah.
them, right? About that. So it's really interesting when you talk about the wrong money. So say I were to come with you with my parents today and they had a house. It was $500,000. It was paid off. Mom needs to go to assisted living. My dad is going to stay home. But my mom looks like she's going to be there for a long time and dad would have to join her. would your first stop be like, let's get the house in a trust? What would you like look at to protect both of them?
Yeah, so what we typically do is we do an intake with a family to identify the assets, identify what really is the health crisis we're navigating. Number one rule is we want to make sure that their loved one is safe, right? In a great setting, whether it's home health care or a facility. But we always are going to we partner with a national group of attorneys. We are not attorneys. We don't try to be attorneys. When you think of Medicaid planning, it is a legal thing, right? It's a legal there it's a legal matter. However, it's all financial. And at the end of the day, attorneys are not fiduciaries. They are not financial advisors. And so their plan is only going to be as good as the financial team they're partnering with. And us on our side, on the financial side, our plan is only going to be as good as the legal team that we partner with. So when it comes to your scenario that you laid out, yeah, we're going to identify what is the best strategy. Oftentimes, what we might do is just we create a trust and we fund it over time. We may not fund it immediately, but we're going to create the trust that, in fact, if one of the individuals dies, right, the trust will then be they're payable for the real estate, right? It's a transfer on death. The real estate will automatically get funded into the trust. That's ideal. We do that for everybody. But oftentimes, once somebody's qualified for benefits, we take off the institutionalized individual's name from the deed, right? So we have to do deed work to take that individual's name off, and then we can do planning from there.
So, say, is there a difference if I were come to you saying, my mom's got these diagnoses, I can tell she's going to need care in 5, 6 years from now versus like, hey, my mom needs care today and I forgot to do this or I didn't do this? What's the difference? What are those outcomes look like?
So it depends on the state because we want to apply all the exceptions to the rules. But I'll give you an example. In Wisconsin, which is our home state, for a community spouse, husband and wife in crisis, we can protect about 100% of the assets. Okay. But what do I mean by that too? Is we also need to navigate the rules that are in place with the facility they're in. So if they've signed an agreement for 2 years of private pay, we have to account for that. Or, some scenario, 3 years of private pay, or maybe it's a year of private pay. We have to work around those numbers. But I think at the end of the day, what I always tell people is depending on the state you're in a crisis, sometimes we are limited in what we can do based on the legal documents that they have in place. So if we have a single person and we didn't do good legal documents, we did statutory forms, we're going to be very limited on what we can help that individual with. But if we got there early enough and they worked with our legal team, we're going to create what I call nuclear powered powers of attorney, right? And what does that do? It gives the agent the authority to do planning, right? Create trust, divest the trust, create penalty periods, give assets away. So that allows us flexibility to do real planning. But at the end of the day, we always tell people for single people, we can pretty much protect about half of the assets, right, in a crisis. For a married couple, we can push that to 75%, oftentimes 100%, depending on the state. But if you get into a pre-planning situation 5 years ahead of time, yeah, we can protect the majority of the assets and make sure that that money is going to be set up for generational wealth for the kids down the road.
And I think when you say generational wealth and Medicaid, what we're talking about Medicaid and you're saying generational
Yeah.
wealth, right? I think that is something that nobody puts together in a Medicaid situation.
No, no, no. Well, here's one thing to consider. Like, you know, how our health does not discriminate, right? So we're all navigating the same thing. There's over 400 different types of dementia. So, if that strikes a loved one, does dementia really care about how much money you have? No, it doesn't. I mean, so you could spend $500,000, you could spend $1 million on your care, or you could spend 250,000. How long you can take care of your loved one is basically based on your net worth. And so when people turn 65 and they retire, they all think about, well, I'm going to get the sailboat, right? We're going to travel around the world. And then they realize they've been retired a few years. They didn't spend their money. And then health conditions deteriorate and people don't buy the sailboat. They don't travel. And so they're sitting on a nest egg. But if you had to ask them, would you want all your money to go to pay for your care as you age, right? Or would you want that money to go to your favorite charity, your loved ones, your grandkids? What choice would you want to make today? And if you could be in control of that choice for a long time, what choice would you make? 99% of the time they're going to say, I want to make sure my family, my money is intended to go to my family. So all our planning does is provide options. We call it put a stop loss in your planning. So if you're a day trader, you traded the stock market, it's about putting a stop loss on your plan. If I have $1 million, I'm willing to spend $250,000, but I can't spend more than $250,000 on my care because my wife might need care down the road too. And so we build their numbers into the plan. It's not what I want to do. It's what they tell me is important to them.
You just debunked the biggest myth, I guess, ever in Medicaid, that Medicaid equals poor
Yeah,
instead of Medicaid equals smart financial planning.
correct. Yep.
Yeah. And I hope everyone really hears that because, you know, you can always come and have a great conversation with Scott because you can see he's like, I told you, he's a magician. So So I think you even kind of you talked about how you don't even, there's crisis planning too, which means not the 5-year look back.
Yep.
Why is everyone so afraid of this 5-year look back if there is ways to plan in crisis?
I look at it as I call it a 5-year look forward. So the government calls it a 5-year look back. And really what that means is if you gave away assets in anticipation of filing for benefits within the next 60 months, 5 years, you're going to be penalized on what you did. Okay, that doesn't mean a penalty is bad. What is the penalty? How do we account for the penalty? We often force the penalty, right? But another scenario is the look forward. Nobody talks about the look forward. The look forward means that we're going to do planning today, right? And we're going to wait and see. Maybe maybe we are healthy today, right? So let's go ahead and do a plan. So 5 years from now, we have options on how we pay for care. So I like to call it the wait and see. So there's two things about Medicaid. You're either for most people, they're one of two categories. They're physically qualified, but they're not financially qualified. Or they're financially qualified and they're not physically qualified. So it's about navigating where they are in their journey, putting the plan together, and at the end of the day, giving them options. So when things get out of control, right? When the cost of care goes from $3,000 a month to $18,000 a month, we're not scrambling trying to figure out how we're going to pay for this. And at the end of the day, if you don't have a plan and you follow the governance rule book, you're going to go broke in the process. You just will. If you look at the numbers, the average person will exhaust their life savings within 2.5 years of entering a nursing home.
Wow.
That's the average. And that's pretty significant. And why I'm passionate about this because that actually was my grandparents. They didn't have a plan, and I watched them spend everything on their care. And not that I was greedy looking for an inheritance, but that's not what my grandpa's plan was. He was an entrepreneur. He was a business owner. He owned multiple gas stations, retired at 55, lived the American dream, and then spent all of his money on having him and my grandma in their retirement on long-term care.
Yeah.
And then you know what? My story is a lot of families' stories as well.
So it sounds like there's a lot of ways to plan, and it doesn't have to, like, if you haven't planned in advance, which you and I are really talking to people and trying to convince them, like, plan early, right? Your plan can change, like, have a plan and then keep working. But we know most people aren't doing that yet, right? So it's nice to know that if you haven't planned, there's still options. But where is too late? Where's where you're like, hey, I'm sorry, I just can't help?
That's a great question. I think sometimes we do run into too late and it may not even be too late, but a lot of people, when they get down to their last 50,000 is when they start thinking like, oh, geez, how do I do all this? But for me, where it's too late is when we didn't, we didn't start, right? We don't have good legal documents. A lot of agents, which are like the agent of the individual, the one that is in charge of the finances for that individual, if the documents are not good, they have very little options. And so we do run into that a lot. And so And we're very mindful of that because I have years of horror stories of how it wasn't handled properly, like telling somebody bad news, right? Because I look at it like this: we can always fix what we've done. So I'll give you an example. We had a client in the past where they've gifted assets, right? And they didn't anticipate being in a facility, and they went to the ADRC and they gave away assets, and you don't qualify for care. Well, we can undo everything they've done. So they gave their house to their kid. Well, let's undo it. Let's turn it back. Let's give it back to mom and dad. And now we can do planning from there. And so with the right legal documents, we pretty much can undo anything that they've done. But if the legal documents are not good, we're very limited on what we can do. And that is because this is America. We all have rights, right? And unless you're giving somebody the authority to act on your behalf, no one can act on your behalf. So we've seen guardianship, right? So a court appoints a guardian for an individual. That's kind of when it's too late.
Yeah. And that is, it's so unfortunate to what happens when you're too late,
Yeah.
right? There's just so many, I'm sure you've seen so many bad situations. So if people are listening right now, is there a too early? Is there a time that it's just like, okay, you're like 45, like I don't know what you're thinking, but is there too early?
So here's the thing, I started in this industry back in the early 90s, and back in the early 90s, we probably had, I would say, you know, 100 companies offering long-term care insurance, right? In the United States. Well, fast forward 30 years, I mean, there's only a handful. You could count them on one hand, insurance companies that are offering long-term care. So today it's really more of a hybrid scenario where people can have their cake and eat it too. So if you start early enough, we can really solve three issues. One, where does anybody really want to have their care? Probably at home, right? That's going to be the future. So let's account for that. So if you're early and you can start accounting for this, leveraging your money into insurance is always going to be your best option, and it's always going to give you the most flexibility on how, when you're going to have your care. And so and I think the future is at home. And your caregiver, it might be your loved one, it could be an RN, it could be somebody you pay, but we need to create the money to pay for that. And so if you were a government worker, you probably have long-term care insurance. If you were a school teacher, you might have long-term care insurance. But everybody else in the general public who is 50 years old right now, they have nothing. And what they're seeing their parents go through is their aha moment. So we get a lot of calls from somebody 50, 60, hey, I need to get some long-term care insurance, right? And so the old school policies where you pay a premium, and if you need care, great, elimination periods, you only can get the care in a facility, right? There was no home health care benefits. Today's hybrid policies, you can have your care at home. Very small elimination periods, but here's the catch. What if you don't need the care? What if you die? You just die. Well, today's policies are geared to give a beneficiary all the money you paid in back.
Oh, very interesting.
Or what if you did it at 50 and all of a sudden at 75, that sailboat I mentioned really is something they want to do? Hey, I've got 60, 70, 80,000 in my long-term care policy, but I really want to buy a sailboat. Okay. Yeah. Cash the policy and get all your money back. And so that's when I say have your cake and eat it too. If you're early, you're going to have nothing but options in the future.
And I think that's super interesting because I know, like, when I've talked to people, like, long-term care insurance kind of, like, has a bad rap. Like, reverse mortgages have they've got, like, bad stigma, and I think a lot of it is that a long time ago, they earned their bad reputation, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because there were so many. Well, here's the thing. The insurance companies, to defend them a little bit, they had no idea what they were getting into, right? So long-term care insurance is not mortality based, right? It's based on your health, which has nothing to do with mortality. I know I have clients that are 50 years old in assisted living. People can't fathom that. You telling me people are 50 years old in assisted living? Absolutely. There's a lot of healthcare conditions that are not covered, right, by healthcare. Okay. And MS is a big one. I mean, we have lots of clients that are 50, 60 MS in assisted living facilities. on government benefits. And so I think just there's this huge stigma, right, on all of that stuff. But I don't know. I think the insurance companies obviously had no clue how to price this, right? And a lot of them went belly up because of the claims. They didn't anticipate that a nursing home in 1997, let's say a monthly cost of an assisted living in 1997 was $1,200 a month. Nobody anticipated that that was going to cost $9,000 in 2026, right? Or memory care. Nobody realized that memory care in 1997 was $3,500 a month. And now in 2026, it's not uncommon to see memory care at $18,000 a month. So how did the insurance companies just underprice the product, and a lot of them just went belly up in the process?
So when you say that, because now I think we're going to scare people into the cost of long-term care insurance and some stuff. So one, where do you see that pricing fall? And are there other options to a high price product?
Yeah. I think what the carriers have gotten really good at is they have experience, right? They have the data now, and they've included what things are going to cost in the future, right? And one thing that I think they learned in this process was how long a community spouse will live, right? So a lot of the things that we see today are based on reimbursement and whatnot. But I think the carriers have gotten a lot smarter. There's still very few people in the space, but the hybrid policies today kind of are the future, in my opinion. It's like lumped into life insurance, right? Which is mortality based, but they've put in per diems on how much maximum you can get out of the policies and whatnot. And look, they've tried this before. So a lot of states have gotten involved, right? And said, well, we're going to have a long-term care mandated plan. They tried that. And states have had qualified long-term care plans involved. Those were underpriced as well, and they didn't really work. They just didn't get adopted to the masses. But at the end of the day, if you have a plan, whatever your plan is, at least you were proactive, right? And it
Yep.
may not work, but at least you were proactive and you made a decision to do it. What I think went wrong is my grandparents' generation, you didn't talk about this stuff. Talking about dying, talking about nursing homes was not family dinner table conversations, right? We never talked about our health. Today, that's all we talk about, right? That's all we talk about. And so it's more, I think it's still a little bit of a morbid, taboo subject matter, but I think with companies like yours and what we're seeing on the education side, people are being a little bit more comfortable having these conversations and having them early.
And I hope that's what we'll leave everyone with, because I could talk to you for hours. You are like I could like soak your words in. I learn so much every time you and I have a conversation. So we'll do this again. But I do think that, again, planning is key. And for everyone listening, come and reach out to Scott, because he truly is amazing. Have that consultation. Come to CareNav. We'll get you your first plan and then get you in touch with Scott. And thank you so much for having the conversation today.
Yeah. Thank you, Lindsay. I really appreciate it.
All right, that's a wrap for today. Until next time, remember, you're not alone. Take things one step at a time, stay centered, and trust your compass. See you next time on the Caregiver's Compass.